Matt Britton, President for Europe, Middle East, and Africa of Google, based in London.
Hello, sorry, no tie.
Sorry, tie.
I like your no tie. And Thibaut Kleiner, Deputy Head of Cabinet of Commissioner Gunther Oettinger at the European Commission in Brussels. So I am Silvia Borelli. I am a reporter at Politico, which some of you might know is headquartered in Brussels, but I am based out of London. So we'll try to make this chat as informal as possible. We're talking digital single market, so by definition, something quite informal, forward-looking, and still to be developed to an extent, right? So, Mr. Hudak, can I start by asking you, given also your previous position as Economic Minister of Slovak Republic, what you think the opportunities of the digital single market might be going forward for Europe, but especially for this region?
I'll maybe start with a little detour, and the detour is that when I was Minister of Economy in Slovakia, I was thinking a lot, not only myself, but obviously with my colleagues in the ministry and in the government, basically about the question, what are going to be the future drivers of the economic growth in a country like Slovakia? Because we have grown during the 90s and in early 2000, mostly thanks to the foreign investment. It was great, and we are still growing thanks to foreign investment. Thanks to this, we became, for example, as Minister Schäuble mentioned today in the previous session, became the biggest producer of cars in the world per capita, which is a great achievement, and experienced a major economic growth. But you can use this as the main driver only for a certain period of time, until the level of salaries gets too high and foreign investors start looking at some other markets. So we have to look at other sources of economic growth. And for me, this new source of economic growth in a country like Slovakia, which is very open, we have over 80% of our GDP coming from exports. So we are open and exposed to global competition. The source of this growth is in innovation. And innovation has to be the main driver of our competitiveness, and competitiveness is the main driver of our ability to rise salaries, to live better, and also to have social environment and support which is needed. From innovation, I think there is a direct road to digital and to digital market as a way, basically as a construct in Europe, how we want to bring digitization closer to the reality of life in Europe. I think the opportunities are great. Opportunities are especially in utilizing the single market, which is one of the key main values of the European Union, that we have a single market, we have the ability to work across borders and to multiply the ability of national markets to bring a new value, what I call European good, public good, to the service of citizens and industry and economy. So, give you one example, and this example comes from the European Investment Bank. Just 2 weeks ago, we approved a big project. It's called, actually I will look at my notes because it has a specific name. It's called Connecting Europe Broadband Fund. It's a major specialized infrastructure investment fund, which will basically help to support and to invest into smaller greenfield projects. And I think this is where institutions like European Investment Bank can be very helpful to create these European-wide intermediaries, like the Infrastructure Fund for Broadband Development, which then can support small greenfield projects. So this fund should be eventually 500 million. EIB contributed over 100 million into the fund. It also helps to leverage private sector investors. But it is I think, excellent example how Europe, through the digital single market, can leverage the European scope of single market and European players like EIB and European Commission to bring digitization to the local level.
What do you think, Mr. Kleiner? What is the European Commission doing to bring this forward? And also, we've heard from the finance ministers earlier, there are some challenges to the single market itself. So the digital single market is a step even further. Where do you see that going? Do you see there might be challenges ahead?
I mean, first, I'm really glad that you mentioned this example of the broadband fund. Is also something that the Commission has supported also with 100 million funding. We hope
Sorry
to
to
announce
the
it
Commission,
very,
I
very
forgot.
soon. But I think the importance of investment is something that we should not underestimate. I mean, we calculated when we launched the digital single market strategy back in May 2015 that the benefits could be every year more than 400 billion euros. So it's really considerable in terms of a potential for growth if we manage to eliminate the barriers between our member states. I mean, we have 28 member states, and digital
So far.
27.
so far, exactly.
This guy's on the way out.
And
We'll talk about it.
for about 30 years now with the single market, we've tried to eliminate barriers in the physical world. But because digital is new and you have new challenges around privacy, around the protection of consumer rights, around all sorts of rules for how platforms are organized and so on, the risk today is that because it's new, member states call for regulation. And when they do it, they will do it at the national level. So we need to be really very vigilant that we do not recreate barriers in the digital world that we have spent 30 years eliminating in the physical world. And I think that's why also the digital single market strategy is so important. It's about the future, but it's also about making sure that we maximize the benefits of what we have today in a fast-growing sector. I mean, e-commerce today is growing between 10 and 20% a year in most member states, but maybe you don't know that only 7% of SMEs sell across borders. So there is a huge potential that we are not exploiting to the full. Europe has a lot of talented engineers, a lot of great entrepreneurs, and much too often they go to the Silicon Valley to grow their business. So I think part also of the message of the digital single market is you can make it here, you can grow your activities through one big digital market, and you can actually build the Googles of tomorrow in Europe.
So, Mr. Britton, before we build the Googles of tomorrow, what does Google today have to tell the European Commission, and what, from an industry perspective, not from a UK and Brexit perspective, what would you say is the most topical issue to make this work now?
Well, speaking for a moment as a Brit, I just want to apologise for what we've done. And
Too late.
You are forgiven.
Not personally responsible, but I think it's potentially very damaging to Europe. And I think I totally agree. People often ask me, why is Google not a European company? Where is the European Google or Facebook, or not so much Twitter or Microsoft, but where is the next big success story going to come from? And I think one of the reasons, Google as a search engine, but actually we're a growth engine. We have millions of small businesses that we work with every day to help them export and grow. And we know that businesses that are online are growing 4 to 8 times faster, creating more jobs and exporting more. And it's not technology business, just to be clear. This is everyday businesses. So this is, for example, I was hearing today about Ultraplast, which makes rooftop boxes for cars here, right here. And they are now growing faster. They went from 20 people to 80 people because they're able, anytime somebody looks for rooftop box, they can appear and they can sell to multiple countries. That's the everyday opportunity that the single market makes easier. So at the moment, they have to apply 28 rule books. And I really feel that the responsibility on Mr. Oettinger and the team on getting the single market right is a big responsibility for Europe, because it's very easy to say, of course we should have one rule book, but whose rule book do you want? Do you want the rule book of Slovakia? Do you want the rule book of Germany, which, by the way, has 19 different data protection authorities within Germany? So it's not just 28 countries, it's actually even more complex than that. Really big burden. The big picture opportunity, let's just be clear here, is the internet population is doubling from 2.7 to 5+ billion over the next 5 years. All of us on mobile devices, all of them consumers wanting to buy rooftop boxes and produce and wanting to consume great content. And that's the opportunity. And I'd also say, aside from my British view, but in my day job at Google, working across Europe, Middle East and Africa, There's a huge opportunity here in this region. You know, this region is a third of the population of Europe. You produce more engineers than the US. You have 800,000 software developers who are very high quality, award-winning. You know, I was just at ESET, which is one of the world's leading malware and antivirus protectors. They have amazing talent there. So the opportunity to put those people to work in the interests of economic growth and prosperity is an enormous opportunity, but there's a gap. And the gap is the kind of digital skills that connect up coding and engineering with business. So we've been looking at how we can help here. We've run a program we call sort of Growth Engine, which is about little digital garages and workshops where people can learn digital skills. We've trained 120,000 so far in the region, and we just rolled it out to 12 more countries. So we're looking in partnership with ministries to try to help provide those digital skills. Now, we're not going to train those people to ninja level, but I think that's a gap that's really important to be filled. And I think the answer to the question, how do you get the next global successes to be from Europe, is to look at that massive opportunity of growth and give those people the opportunity to reach scale across 500 million consumers in the simplest possible way.
So, Mr. Hudak, how do you think this gap could perhaps be filled from your perspective?
Well, I think it's a complex question, especially in our region, because in our region, which has many post-socialist elements, we tend to be structured vertically, because everything was kind of done top-down in the past. And basically in the modern economy, which is open economy, dynamic economy, you have to think and work in a more horizontal way. And this is what we are missing in the sense of connecting education, connecting R&D, science and development, research and development with the commercialization, with application in real economy. And this is something, I think what you mentioned is very much linked to this. You know, how do we, on one hand, develop education, the type of education which is needed by modern economy? Because we are producing many highly educated people, but frankly, not all of them or minority of those are really in the level and type of education which is needed by modern economy. So how do you modernize education in the way which would fit the demands of the modern economy? Then how do you establish institutions and focus science on those areas which are really in the modern economy? And then especially, and I think this is the biggest problem, how do you transfer the knowledge and new innovative ideas into the commercial use? And this is where we are in Europe lacking behind Silicon Valleys and this type of areas, that we have very good engineers, we have great scientists, they have good ideas, but they are not able to implement these ideas in Europe, and they have to go elsewhere.
I would like to say, I'd like to be a bit more optimistic than you on that.
No,
So
I'm just giving the kind of bad side. Of course, there are many good examples. Okay, I mean, I have to balance, yes. But to finish on the optimistic side, for example, what in Slovakia we have started doing is to create innovation clusters. And these innovation clusters are basically a way how to bring education, science, and implementation, commercialization together. Of course, we need to define what those areas are in Slovakia, because we are car manufacturing nation. So one certainly is in the area of car innovation, smart cars, etc., but also smart energy. So I think one opportunity for these countries and smaller countries like Slovakia is to clearly define what are the areas where we have the best innovative potential, and then really better connect education with research and the application through creation of the clusters which would be horizontally linked with each other.
So I think I totally support that. I think also, though, it's not simply a question of sort of top-down industrial policy. What I see is a huge amount of bottom-up innovation and potential. So, as I say, the big opportunity is every business. It's the beefsteak shop in Poland that now sells around the world thanks to the internet. But there is also the technical opportunity, and I think that's part of what we see. Why am I optimistic? Well, if I look at the apps that we see downloaded on Android, 5 of the top 10 are European. 5 of the top 10. 40% of the top 100 come from Europe. Why is that important? Well, they are using tools and what you might call a platform that's been developed in Silicon Valley, let's face it, and around the world, to reach 1 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.8 billion people. So it's suddenly possible to gain scale tremendously through using those tools. And as long as there's opportunities like that, it should be possible for every business, every entrepreneur, every household to access that kind of technology to reach scale. And that was never possible before. And that's one of the reasons that I'd say I'm really optimistic. If we can provide those sort of tools, then people can really make small-scale businesses suddenly much larger.
May I just, because you told us that we have to be informal. So on the informal side and optimistic side, I just had meeting with people from Uber,
Yeah.
which is certainly a new kind of disruptive technology,
Yeah.
whatever you call it. And I asked them, what are the countries in Europe where you have the best opportunities to grow and where we are most active? And they actually listed countries of Central Eastern Europe. So
Yes.
they mentioned all the Baltics,
Yeah.
which are the most liberal and open. They mentioned Slovakia,
Yeah.
and etc. So I think that you are right. I think we have the potential here. We have the population, which is young, which is open to new technologies. The issue is how do we utilize this potential in the best way?
So I am going to bring in a question that actually relates to this that we've received through the Tatra Summit app, and this is for Mr. Kleiner. So this anonymous person from the app is asking, given the growing importance of networks like for car industries, for example, how important is the ownership of the platforms that access those networks, and does it matter to Europe if the platforms are not European owned?
I think that's an excellent question, and just to follow on the optimistic note, actually the rate of entrepreneurs over the population in Europe is in fact greater than in the US in terms of people who start their own company. But where we don't manage to be as efficient is in scaling up. And in Bratislava, actually 1 month ago, there was the summit there, the Digital Assembly, and the Scale-Up Manifesto that was presented to Commissioner Oettinger to actually tackle this problem, how to go from very rich communities of startups to the scale-ups and those that will win. And to your question, I think that's exactly what we are also looking at, the importance of platforms, because at the end of the day, I mean, one view is that platforms are just facilitators. They are enabling, app developers. They are developing new services to emerge. Another view is that sometimes they also have a special responsibility, because if you look at what happened, for instance, in the industry like photography, in 10 years, businesses have been wiped out because new business models that were more agile and more geared to the digital era were simply, winning the market. This is something that is worrying in some of the traditional industry, because they are questioning what will be the business model of the future. Will cars, for instance, be still objects that you want to own in the future? Or will it be actually unimportant what kind of brand of cars you're driving? What matters will only be the specific design that you will get from the apps that help you driving this car. I mean, that's a very legitimate question.
Maybe a Google car.
Maybe, but that's I think, in a way, what is at stake at the moment. Personally, I don't think we should be worried about just one solution. And the way we approach platforms is that actually the game is on. There is no perfect answer yet. What we are trying to develop is through, for instance, our policies on platforms to make sure that they are guiding principles, meaning that actually you have a level playing field. That the fact that you have a large platform doesn't mean that competitors are excluded. Or the fact that you are treating consumers is fair enough, that their data will not be abused or monopolized only for the benefit of the platform. But as long as you have this framework that is open, that is fair and transparent, there is no reason why you should be afraid about platforms as such. Everybody is free to compete, and the business models of tomorrow are not written today.
So it's boring on a panel, isn't it, where everybody agrees with each other? But I
Does
would have to
anyone
say,
from
I
our-
agree.
Oh, sorry, you agree. No, go ahead.
So I agree with you should see platforms as an opportunity where they are allowing people to access amazing technology that somebody else has invested in. So whether it's Google Search connecting a business and a customer, or whether it's, in our case, Android, which is helping an app developer connect with users. And absolutely, you should make sure that those things operate to the standard you'd like. Now, Mr. Oettinger's not here in person, but I know he's sort of said, the way to ensure that Europe creates the platforms as the future is to regulate the platforms of today. I would argue the way to ensure Europe creates the platforms of the future is innovation, and to use the platforms of tools of today to build the platforms and tools of tomorrow on top of them. And I think that's a very different approach to thinking about growth and innovation. And I think that the baton is firmly held by this region in terms of looking outwards and forwards to a future through innovation, through the kind of engineering talent that is so strong here, and through using the best available tools for today to build innovation of the future for tomorrow.
But
And so,
isn't that what you are talking about? Isn't this what is called future-proof regulation? I mean, because you do need to have some regulation.
Of course,
yeah,
of course, and of course,
cannot have
all these
complete
we're
chaos,
subject
but,
to
yeah.
we and anybody else you might describe as a platform. And by the way, it's not clear what a platform is in this context. I would argue, a newspaper or a shopping center is a platform in as much as anything else. But of course, we are subject to all the rules and regulations, as are Uber and everybody else. And indeed, the European Commission is asking us some pretty detailed questions about how we operate, which we're extremely happy to answer. I think one of the challenges with this technology is that you can use a word like level playing field or big data. Actually, the detail of what it means is really important. So we're delighted to have the chance to provide a lot of detail about how we operate. And if there are ways in which we can improve, we will improve. The challenge is to be able to do that in a timely fashion. And that's one of the challenges, I think, and as I say, it's a burden, I think, for politicians and lawmakers to think about how do you put the rules in place that give people the certainty to invest and innovate, but also allow dynamic and creative economies to emerge very fast. And that is a real challenge.
Does anyone from the audience perhaps have a question for our panelists? Does anyone want to say it? The lady in yellow, please make sure you keep the question short for our panelists.
Yes, this is working. My name is Isabel Buska. I represent the German Consumer Organization. I have a question for the Commission representative here. Matt from Google just said we need to make sure companies have access to 500 million consumers. I think this is already so. If they want to sell in 28, soon 27 member states, they can do so. However, if you ask the Slovak citizens here around you, ask them how much access they have actually to digital content that is being produced and placed across the EU. What is the Commission doing so that the Slovak citizens will actually get access to more digital content in the future?
Wait, before we answer, was there possibly another question so we can take them both? And no? Okay, sorry, I thought there was another question from the audience, but no, go ahead if you want to answer the question.
I mean, I can try to. I think it's an excellent question because it's also a frustration we have in Brussels. I mean, the motto of the European Union is united in diversity. So diversity, be it from the cultural point of view, but also in terms of the content you can find online or offline, is something that we care deeply about. And it's a bit tragic if you look at actually the consumption of digital content across Europe. I mean, for instance, movies typically, US movies, which will be distributed more or less in half of all the European Union member states. A European-made movie will be distributed maybe in 2 or 3 member states, which shows a big gap in terms of access to European content from one member state to the other, if you want. So that's something we have tried to tackle through at least 3 measures in the digital single market. The first one has to do with the access to content, so trying to prevent barriers in terms of geo-blocking, for instance, which is a measure where you don't manage to access the content because the website drives you to another place. Another measure was a proposal which is currently under discussion, and that's the portability of content, so that when you have bought something in one country, you can keep it with you even if you're traveling across Europe. And a third measure, and maybe the most important, has to do with the copyright proposals. So there very concretely, and also in the audiovisual rules, we are supporting the creation of video-on-demand platforms that will provide pan-European content, for instance. We are also supporting new types of licenses that will be pan-European from day one, so that the same content, you don't need to negotiate 27 or 28 times, but you can directly distribute across European countries. Finally, in terms of the e-commerce itself, through the geo-blocking and this proposal, we are trying to make sure that whenever you want to access a website and when you want to buy digital content, this will be possible. Because when you go today, you know, in Slovakia, I came from Brussels this morning, if I go to a shop here in Bratislava, I will be able to buy some good. But sometimes if I do that from my living room through an e-commerce site, it's not possible. This is not acceptable, and that's why we want to tackle these barriers.
Just to build on that, I think there's lots of evidence that consumers would like to consume content from outside the country of origin. So, you know, we know on YouTube that 85% of content is consumed by people outside the country of origin. So people are looking a lot for this kind of content. And actually, of course, we're now in a world where you don't have to be a professional content creator to be able to create amazing content and share it. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, and I think you're absolutely right about how do you get the balance. You really want to protect copyright, because as a principle, to be able to earn a return on your creativity is important, but you also want to create more fluidity there. And I think one of the challenges here in the rules is, you know, we built on YouTube this technology called Content ID that allows anybody who's created content to go online and see, are there copies of my content out there, identify them and either take them down or leave them up or monetize them or decide where they want it to be viewed. And actually, 90% of people who go online and claim their content leave it up, because it gives them control and it gives them an opportunity for that content to connect with fans all around the world. So I think with the right kind of rights protection combined with what new technology can do, we can create benefits to consumers and content creators. But it's a tricky path to walk. But again, I would be optimistic. When I see what people are doing creatively and how people are consuming content today, I think there's a huge opportunity for Europe's content creators to be successful.
But do you still think there are some barriers coming, for example, from regulation? Because throughout the EU, although there are some common regulations in many different countries, there are different regulations in different spaces of all those things that are part or are supposed to be part of the digital single market. So yesterday, for example, we were discussing with some Slovak venture capitalists that were flagging that they have difficulties finding investments and investing in startups that aren't local, because although boundaries and borders aren't there, somehow for capital, so for money and for regulation, they still exist. So this, I think, goes for both Mr. Hudak and Mr. Kleiner. What is your view on that?
If you start on that, I can say something about the financing. But
Yes,
please
I
go
mean,
ahead on regulations.
I think in reality, sometimes the barriers are also in the heads of people. You know, the exact regulation today has been really improved over the last 10 years to facilitate pan-European venture capital, for instance. We will have next month proposals to tackle VAT that is very often perceived as a problem. And we have already last year made proposals as regard consumer protection and contracts, because also that's some of the nitty-gritty that sometimes, you know, makes it difficult to operate across borders. But very often one of the issues we find is that, you know, there is also a problem of creating links across borders. And that's why the Commission has launched 3 years ago with partners including, by the way, Google, Microsoft, but also a lot of telecom operators, an initiative which is called Startup Europe, and that tries actually to link various local ecosystems so that, you know, you think big from day one and you don't feel restricted by your local environment. So very often I think that, you know, the barriers, we are trying to tackle them, but sometimes they are overstated compared to really the attempt to doing it and to finding networks across Europe.
Maybe on the financial side, several things. One is basically how do we provide support for innovative people along the cycle of the development. Yeah? So there is a startup which needs some angel investor, seed capital, etc. Then it goes into a scale-up where typical venture capital type of institutions and investors come, and then goes further to normal SME, small medium enterprise. And in a way, in Europe, we are lacking this kind of full scale of investors and also in way regulations for these markets, which would be kind of pan-European, and I think this is something we need to work on. But on the other hand, there are already initiatives which, for example, also EIB, and in this specific example, I want to use European Investment Fund, which is part of EIB, are launching. Actually, today we had a signing ceremony for another investment bank, in this case International Investment Bank, joining so-called Central European Fund of Funds, which is an effort to create a fund of funds in terms of the equity capital, especially focused on the scale-ups and kind of early stage small enterprises in Central Europe. In this case, it's Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria, and Slovenia. And basically, I think it's another way how we are trying to bring more pan-state or interstate level of connectivity, but also a financial vehicle, which will allow the startups to penetrate through our markets. Because one of the problems in our region and for, let's say, startups in Slovakia is that Slovakia as such is a small market. So we need to allow these young companies to have a possibility to go beyond national borders. And especially if they are in cybersecurity or in digital area, they do have to go across borders. And here we have regulations which have to allow it, which is European Commission and, of course, national regulations. But you also have to create the financial environment which would allow them to grow beyond just the national environment. So I think that there are ways which we are developing in this direction. Of course, much more has to be done.
I think we've talked a bit about a route to scale, and hopefully single rule book, digital single market will be a big benefit. We talked a bit about access to finance. I touched on skills, and I do think the skills gap is a part of this. I think the other thing that really will help us here is examples of success. So just like when you look at somebody competing at the Olympics and you think that's unachievable, and then you find that there's somebody that has gone and can do it, that inspires people to try things. And I think one of the things we've worked on recently is something we call the New Europe 100 with the FT and Res Publica and the International Visegrad Fund, which is about finding and highlighting in Central Europe examples of people who are showing the way. And we're about to publish our third year of this. And I think pointing to examples of people who are being successful that come from your background is a really important thing for us to do here as well. So I think we shouldn't underestimate skills, but I think there's this point about the level of ambition. And I think it's incumbent on all of us in leadership positions of whatever sort, bless you. And if you're in a leadership position, you should be highlighting the fact that the internet population is going to double. Right? We're going to be able to access 5, 6, 7 billion people within 10 years. And if you are producing content, if you are producing goods and services, if you want to connect with those kinds of people, there's a huge opportunity ahead of us. And I think there's a danger that we miss out on that. And so we need to make sure that people are aware of it, they're equipped with the skills, and they can also see people like them who are succeeding in that environment. So we're really proud to support that kind of thing and see more and more great people coming through from this region.
May I just on this, Matt?
Very quickly, because we only have 3 minutes to go, and I really need to ask all of you a final question.
Well, this could be a good
point. Small one.
Very small answer. 30 seconds, go.
No, because you mentioned examples of success. I think, of course, it's very important, but I think for our region, it's important also to show examples of failure. Because we have a culture of the concern about the failure. People are basically not starting new things, new businesses, because in this society, it's traditionally failure or if you don't succeed is considered to be tragic. And I think people who are in the innovations, they know that they have to start and try several times until they succeed. So to show that failure is not something bad, that it's part of the process of innovation, I think is very important. Just small point.
Okay, so the last question, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, we won't even be able to address all the questions that came in through the Tatra Summit app. But since we spoke about skills and borders, I have to ask you about Brexit. And I have to ask you about Brexit both from a EU perspective and a UK perspective. So I think it's an issue that has to do with the skills and the talent that is currently based in the UK, perhaps all the engineers or the tech guys that come over from Eastern Europe, for example, and that are now based in the UK, but also the funds, because of course the UK is a very big hub for venture capital investors and so forth. So can I have a really short take from each one of you on this, and what do you think the main challenges and the problems and also the solution perhaps might be to this?
Okay.
That was a very long question, so there is not a short answer. So what drove the Brexit vote, and I think is also driving a rise in nationalism and pessimism across not just Europe but across the US. Let's watch this space in 10 days or whatever. It is a concern about people connecting with a future that they feel positive about, and that I think is the fundamental core of the issue, whether you're in the UK or Germany or France or here. So I think it presents a real problem for the European project, a project which has struggled to deal with the refugee crisis, that's struggled to deal with the currency, and is now seeing the world's 5th biggest economy leave. And I think the people will want to see some change. As a Brit, I worry about the impact on our economy, but I also worry in my job and as a proud European about the impact on the European project.
Mr. Hudak?
Well, I think it's the Brexit is both a challenge but also an opportunity for Europe. Challenge in the sense that yes, we have to basically find a way how to do this divorce in a civilized way, and it has all many elements, including the financial center of Europe in London City and so on. But then the opportunity for Europe to kind of re-energize itself, because as Matt pointed out, this is not only UK issue, it's the issue of Europe. How do we make Europe much closer to the citizens, and how to make it dynamic, competitive, etc. And here there is a big challenge, because I think basically we'll have a challenge in the 27 to show that 27 can do better together than UK by itself. And this will be not an easy exercise.
Mr. Kleiner, 20 seconds to give your take
20
on this.
seconds. I mean, I was in London 2 weeks ago, and if you walk around, you see many people from all over the world, but especially from Europe. And indeed, I think that Tech City is populated by engineers from the rest of Europe. So it's a big danger, I think, for the current situation of London as one of the most vibrant places for ICT industry. My hope and my expectation is actually that the British people is very pragmatic and business oriented. So we will find solutions that are beneficial on both sides. But I think that the European project will not stop just because of, I think, an unfortunate decision of the British people. I think that there is a bright future ahead. There are more countries that want to join, actually. And I'm quite positive about the difficulties we are managing to overcome. I mean, and even yesterday with the trade agreement with Canada, I mean, it shows the difficulties we have currently, but it also shows the resilience that Europe is having over the last 3-4 years. I mean, one crisis following another one, and we're still standing. And I think we're not done yet. And I think if you look at the numbers coming out now of the Eurozone, and I think this was discussed a bit earlier today, I mean, I think growth is back. And I think we have with the digital single market at least one very enthusiastic project that I hope can mobilize the youth. 1 million jobs currently in the digital sector. So the skills we have to build. We have also to invest in infrastructures. That's something we forgot to mention. It's really very important. But once we do these things, I think that the future is just waiting for us.
Well, on this optimistic note, I think we have to close it because unfortunately our time is up. So gentlemen, thank you very much. You've been great. It looks like no one fell asleep. So thank you very much. Very lively panel. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for following. And refreshments are outside. Please be back in your seats at 4. Thank you also to everyone that followed online through the Tatra Summit.org website. Thank you.